Hello, and welcome to the Invest with Carl podcast. This podcast will bring you obviously everything about Carl Investments, discussions about new features and strategies being launched, as well as commentary on general alternative investments news, slanting towards quantitative perspectives and the general democratization of sophisticated investments. Or said simply, bringing high quality, sophisticated investments to all investors. Hello, and welcome to the Invest with Carl podcast. I'm your host today, Jamie Uppenberg, and a member of the Carl team. So today you just have me, and we're going to talk about the story of idle cash. So we have a couple different types of investors on our platform. We have investors who are replacing bonds, bond market we might talk about in an upcoming episode. There's some interesting activity there. We have some investors who are looking to just really have higher double-digit gains in their portfolios, the climbers, looking to double their portfolio in a year, those kinds of investors. And we have some savings investors who are looking to have their idle cash make money. And we have several other kinds of investors as well. This is just an example, but today we're going to talk about the savers and that story of idle cash and why investments make sense for idle cash now when they didn't necessarily used to, or at different times in the past they haven't. But today they do. So in the story of idle cash, let's talk about what we used to do. So this is cash that you don't necessarily need this month, maybe not next month. You have it in a bank account, right? From the 1970s through roughly the 2000s, businesses took extra cash and put it in businesses or individuals. We would take our extra cash and put it in savings accounts, money markets, and CDs, essentially certificates of deposit, essentially banking products, right? So you put your money in the bank and let it sit. You could get roughly, depending on how long you locked it up, you could get anywhere from a 5 to 20% return. And that was good to awesome, really. So this made sense during these periods, but it didn't necessarily make sense at other times because there came the plummet. Now, I want to note that, the interest rates offered on banking products were always up and down. They weren't always amazing, but there did come a plummet in the early 2000s where interest rates on those banking products went down and they have not come back up. You will not often see returns above 2%, and on a savings account, it'd be hard pressed. You're hard pressed to get 2%. That is below inflation, which is the amount that everything increases in price year over year. So essentially, your money is worth less at the end of the year, coming in under 2% than it was at the beginning. So if you put your money in banking products in the 2000s, your money is really losing value. You're going to get less and less for it. So the question becomes, what do people do? This is what we're used to doing. You'll talk to people and this is what they still do. I belong to an association, a beach association, and they still put their idle cash, over $50,000. It goes into CDs. And they're really, it loses its value. They can buy less and less with it year over year. So what are the options? Now, investments generally, they look good. Cash customers begin to look at investments because they can provide, low minimums, easy access and liquidity. They need targeted returns and personally right risk profiles. So for an investment to make sense, it has to be for the amount of money you have. It should be liquid because remember, this is savings. Like we don't want to tie this up it's not like your retirement funds where you're going to be like, leave it for 10 to 30 years, right? We're not going to touch that. This is money we may need in a couple of months. So it needs to be liquid and easily accessible. It needs to have targeted returns that make sense and have those right risk profiles. And Here at Carl, we would focus on the personally right risk profiles. That's really where investments have fallen down for people in the past. Because if they're going to invest their idle cash into traditionally stocks or bonds, this becomes a challenge. Stocks have, they can be very volatile. You can lose 30% of your total value overnight, and it can take 3 months to just get back up to where you were. That's not really how you want to replace savings. That doesn't necessarily make sense. Um, and this is very common in stocks. This is what this is known to happen in the stock indexes. And then you have bonds where you might be locking up your money for more time than you want. And the bond market right now is not providing what it used to, right? So you don't have these nice, steady, 4% returns that you can be certain of. That's not happening. So you're both locked and your rate is not there in the bond market. So investments, they look good overall, but how do we find the right risk profile? That becomes the question for idle cash. And that's where I think the investors who have taken this route within Carl, they're finding the quantitative hedge fund advantages. So in general, quantitative hedge funds are going to analyze vast amounts of data, more data than you and I can process. And they are looking to take advantage of all different kinds of markets. And they have relatively different kinds of profiles or strategies. So depending on what your profile is, usually you can find one that matches the amount of risk that you want to take. So these quantitative hedge funds are private investment groups that are using complex investment techniques to improve performance and reduce risk, take the edges off of the downturns. So you're investing with a professional, and the question is, do the goals of the professional and the professional's underlying strategy match with your own risk and gain goals? So that is where Carl funds come into play. Carl investment opportunities really overcome the limits of traditional investments when you're looking at replacing savings, when you're looking at making idle cash work for you. Okay, that's the goal of the story of idle cash, is you don't want cash sitting around and ultimately losing value from inflation and other deters. So these market managed and automated funds, they were only available to enterprise level or pro investors, institutions and the uber wealthy. I've mentioned this many times, with very high buy-ins and lockup periods. Now you can get in for as low as $20,000. So if you have $20,000 or $50,000 that's generally sitting in the bank, as long as you just need it, you need it on a monthly basis, you would be able to both invest it, get a couple months gain, and it would be liquid whenever you needed it on a monthly basis. You're also going to have something that hedge funds didn't have in the past, which is real-time performance statistics. It can also be scary to put to put savings into investments and really not know how they're performing. That's also something someone probably wouldn't want to do with their savings. With Carl investments, you don't have to. You can literally watch your investments as they trade, as they perform, and then make decisions month over month about how you might want to reallocate or increase or decrease investments. These options are fully available to you as you watch the real-time performance of your money. And that can be very important when you're in a more, a month level investment rather than a multi-years level investment. So those are the challenges of the story of idle cash and making idle cash work for you. You're not really going to find what you historically would. Most people are looking for something new and different, because even as people look towards investments, they just didn't have the type of risk structures that savers were looking for. Carl has overcome these options, and we believe if you're this type of investor where you've got some sitting around, you can find a risk profile in one of our funds that's right for you. So, and I'm sure you've heard me talk about these profiles before, but you can diversify into a tail hedge where you just want to make sure you're gaining when the market is down. Probably maybe not a saver would go there, right? There are funds that, and then there's climbers, which I call, they are really looking for gains. K2 fits into this category. They're going to stay put if they don't see an opportunity to increase value overall. They don't hedge, right? They're looking for a solid gain. And you'll see that is where we see a lot of savers go into funds that are like that. Now, you do have, in addition, a fund like Victory Peak is doing a little bit of both. They will both look for gains in the market when they are available. They have 9 systems, competing systems to do this in Victory Peak. And then they're also going to hedge when the market goes down. So you can look at these funds and their risk profiles. You can go to the Analyze section of the Carl mobile app, which is the middle icon at the bottom, a little magnifying glass. And you can go into explore an individual fund and go into information, and you can see their risk profiles. How often, what is their annual gains in a particular period? What's their worst downturn? What's the average length of their downturns? That's where you can see and you can find an investment that best matches your risk appetite, particularly if you're looking to have idle cash work. Now, idle cash can work for an individual. I actually have some idle cash on Carl. And then we have a couple of entities as well. So businesses do this too. They might have more like a couple 100,000 or a couple 100,000 that tends to just sit in their bank accounts, not working. You can move off a certain portion of that and have it work for you for 3 months or 5 months until you might need those funds. And ultimately with the goal of increasing the value of your cash and have it working rather than have it sitting and generally, even though the pennies don't go down, the overall value of the money is going down. So come into Carl, take a look at the risk profiles of the investments. Oh, Kilimanjaro is out there it's invested in commodities. It has a strategy on the pricing of all kinds of different commodities, and really leveled out, really studied out in the past year or two its volatility. So it's really nice right now. At least I think so. So you can take a look at that as well. Point being, you can see the risk profiles. You can take a look and see which one matches what you might want to do with some idle cash and allow that cash to work for you. So this is the story of idle cash and what we used to do and what we do today. Hope you've enjoyed it. As always, we're here at Carl anytime. You can meet with us at any time. If you go to investwithcarl.com, there is a Talk to Carl button at the top. So at any time, if you'd like to talk about this investment strategy or any one of our individual strategies, we are happy to walk you through. We look forward to our next episode. Thank you so much for being with us today and have a great 2 weeks. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Invest with Carl podcast. The views shared on this podcast do not necessarily reflect the views of Carl. This podcast is intended for informational purposes only and is not intended to constitute and should not be deemed to be an offer to sell or a solicitation of an offer to buy any security or investment, financial advisory, legal, tax, accounting, or other professional advice. Carl funds are currently available to accredited investors with a minimum investment of $20,000. To learn more about Carl and to download the Carl app, go to investwithcarl.com.